The desert evening had settled into that eerie stillness that only the high mesas of Arizona could hold, the kind where every distant coyote call seemed like a warning whispered by the land itself, and where every shadow stretched long like the memory of something ancient. On the far edge of her ranch, Clara Dawson wiped the sweat from her jawline, glanced at the sinking sun, and tightened the rope around the cranky calf she was trying to pull from the brush. She had worked these lands for 12 years, ever since her father died and left her a stretch of desert as stubborn as she was, but she had never once feared anything in it, until she heard the rattling. It wasn't the sharp, frantic buzz of warning, but the slow, deliberate percussion of a rattler that had already decided its strike was justified. Before she could turn, before instinct could shove her into motion, the snake burst from the prickly pear at her feet and drove its fangs into the soft part of her upper thigh. She screamed, stumbling backward, gripping her leg as lightning pain shot upward, and her veins seemed to throb in unnatural rhythm. She kicked the rattler away, watched it vanish into brush as silent as a ghost, and fell onto her hands as nausea clawed through her body. She knew the nearest clinic was 50 miles away. Her truck was a mile behind her, and the sky was dimming into cold desert night. Panic rose in her throat like fire. She clutched the bite, watching the flesh swell, the skin darken, the venom working with merciless efficiency. She tried to crawl. She tried to breathe. She tried not to think of her father dying out here in similar isolation. But her body was faltering fast until she heard the soft footfall of someone approaching from the ridge. Out of the drifting shadows came Nantan, her Apache neighbor, a man of calm presence and eyes as steady as canyon stone, who often visited her ranch to trade firewood or tell gentle stories about the land that once belonged entirely to his people. Yet tonight, when he saw her collapsed on the earth, his calm shattered. He dropped to his knees, face blanching as he saw the bite, the swelling, the darkening lines spreading like black lightning. "Clara, that rattler was large," he said, voice shaking. "That venom is strong. You don't have long." She tried to answer, but her breath hitched, her vision speckled, and the world began to blur. Without hesitation, he tore cloth from his sleeve, pressed it tight above the wound. And then, his voice suddenly desperate, almost pleading, he looked her in the eyes and said, "Rancher, please. Please get the poison out. You must pull it, force it, spit it out if you have to. If you don't, the venom will reach your heart." Clara stared at him, dizzy, terrified, realizing that she might actually die here on the land she had spent her life fighting for. The stars flickered overhead. The desert held its breath. And although she had never believed in the old stories Nantan spoke of, the ones about courage rising like fire from the soul, something inside her told her she wasn't done fighting. The story of her survival had just begun. Clara forced herself upright, every nerve in her body screaming as if the poison itself were a living creature clawing toward her heart, and she dug her fingers into the wound while Nantan held her shoulders steady, whispering words in Apache that she didn't understand but felt like a rope pulling her back from the abyss. The pain was blinding, white-hot, animalistic, yet she pressed, squeezed, spit, cried, and cursed until dark. Venom bled from her thigh and the edges of her vision began to sharpen again. Sweat soaked her hair. The desert wind cooled her fevered skin. But even after the immediate danger passed, she could feel the venom lingering like a shadow inside her veins. Nantan lifted her into his arms, despite her protests, and carried her across the rugged terrain toward her truck, stumbling more than once but never letting her fall. She felt his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady and powerful, grounding her in a way that reminded her the world was still real, still worth clinging to. He drove her truck across the moonlit dirt road with a speed so reckless it tore dust into spirals behind them, and when the engine sputtered or the tires skidded over loose stones, he shouted to her, "Stay awake, Clara! Stay with me!" as if his voice alone could tether her to life. The venom made her memories drift like smoke, her father teaching her how to mend a fence, her first horse galloping across the range, the night she spent watching storms break over the mountains. She wondered if dying felt like that, slipping backward through all the people who shaped you. By the time they reached the clinic, she was barely conscious. But Nantan burst through, the doors carrying her like a warrior, dragging his comrade from a battlefield. The nurse took one look at the wound and gasped, shouting for anti-venom IVs and oxygen. Clara felt cold liquid push through her veins. A burning reversal, a fight against the venom's claim. Hours passed in a haze of pain, exhaustion, and whispered prayers she didn't know she still had inside her. But when dawn arrived, soft, pale, golden, she opened her eyes and found Nantan sleeping in a chair at her bedside. Arms crossed, head bowed as if he'd been guarding her life all night. When he stirred awake, relief flooded his features. "You're still here," he said softly. "You fought." She smiled weakly. "Only because you told me to," she whispered. "Only because you didn't let me die in my own dirt." He shook his head. "You lived because you refused to surrender. The land respects that." Clara reached for his hand, feeling the rough calluses, the warmth, the honesty of someone who understood this wild place better than anyone she'd ever known. And in that quiet dawn, she realized something. Some battles in the desert were meant to be fought alone, but some were meant to be survived together. The rattlesnake had torn into her flesh, but the fight to live had carved something far deeper. Courage, connection, and gratitude that would shape the rest of her life. And to everyone listening to her story now, everyone who has ever faced their own desert, their own venom, their own moment where the world tipped toward darkness, Clara had one message to pass on. Don't walk away from stories like this. Don't miss the next battle, the next miracle, the next breath-stealing moment. Subscribe to the channel, join the journey, and let every story remind you how fiercely life can burn even when the desert goes dark.